Brilliance Audio.
Single Dads Club by Therese Beharrie, performed by Kaneta Kanutu. No one had prepared him for this. They'd warned him he'd be tired. He was. They'd warned him he wouldn't understand the love flooding his body because he had a son. He didn't. But no one, and Rowan Quinn thought this was particularly important, had told him that in the first few days of his son's life, there'd be a thick, sticky black substance coming out of his son's body, and Rowan would have to clean it up. And pretend to not be completely, utterly grossed out. "It's normal," the bright-eyed nurse had told him and McKenna the first time it happened. "And good. Your son's bowels are working. That's a good sign." Yeah, it was a good sign. Also, a really gross sign. "It should last no longer than 5 days." And she'd winked at them. Now he'd only been a parent for 3 days. He'd had little sleep during that time, jumping at every sound and peep, which babies made a lot of, but looking back at that conversation, he didn't think winking was appropriate. Parenting wasn't the kind of thing he'd associated with winking. It deserved gravitas, and if he'd been in the right state of mind, he might have told the nurse that. But he hadn't been in the right state of mind, not since McKenna had told him, after their fluke of a one-night stand, that she was pregnant and he was the father. He was a father. He was a father. His biggest nightmare. Rowan took a breath and lifted Declan's legs. 1 wipe, 2 wipes, 5 wipes later, he'd cleaned most of the mess. And as he put the new diaper under his son's bum, he got sprayed in the face. With urine. For the 3rd time in as many days. "Really?" he asked Declan, who didn't even have the decency to look him in the eyes. "You're really going to take that shot today, huh? Didn't think yesterday and the day before were good enough?" Ignoring the pee on his face, not a sentence he'd have predicted he'd think, he finished changing Declan's diaper and got a wet wipe for his face. "Your aim's getting better," he said, cleaning his forehead and nose. "Or worse, I guess." Declan didn't say anything. He had his pacifier in, was making cute sucking sounds, and Rowan's heart filled in a strange and unfamiliar way. It scared him how big his heart grew, how full it felt when he simply looked at his son. Surely that wasn't healthy. Surely it meant something was wrong with him, that he needed to see a doctor or a psychologist or whatever kind of professional to make sure he was okay. But he didn't need a professional to know he wasn't okay. He was a father. He'd never thought he'd be one, after growing up the way he had. No, he didn't want to be a father, and if he were going to be one, this wasn't the way he'd wanted to happen. He wanted to give his son what he'd never had. Stability. A normal family. Except now, Declan would never have that, and it was Rowan's fault. Rowan's phone rang. He grabbed it off the bed, afraid it would unsettle Declan, even though it was on vibrate. He'd turned the ringer off on the day Declan was born, and hadn't turned it back on since. He put Declan in his bassinet and waited a minute to see if the kid would cry. And when he didn't, Rowan slipped into the other room, taking the monitor with him. His eyes didn't move from it as he answered. "What?" "Is that any way to speak to your grandmother, Rowan?" He opened his mouth, but his grandmother continued. "I suppose that sort of curtness answers my question about how you're doing." It wasn't a question, not really, and yet somehow he felt compelled to reply. "We're hanging in there." He paused. Did it matter how honest he was? Would his grandmother hear what he wasn't saying like she usually did? He relented. "It's hard. Harder than I thought." He was embarrassed to admit it. Of course it was harder than he'd thought. Of course it was.